Excellent. Welcome, everybody. My name is Phoebe Morad. I get to be Executive Director of Lutheran's Restoring Creation. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Braintree, which is in the state of Massachusetts, which also happen in my particular area. It's also where Massachusetts people continue to care for the land that we are on. And I am going to open right now with our knowledge acknowledgement. While I do that, I would invite you all in the chat to also share where you're zooming in from, if you happen to know the land, the original land keepers where you are, your home territory. How about also, it's a nice little intimate group tonight. I would like to know, with the theme we have tonight, I would like to know what really motivates you and gets you going without turning anything on. And please don't be explicit. This is a family crowd, okay? So if you could share, if you think of something that you really enjoy doing that doesn't require turning on a switch, think of that and write that in the chat if you could. That's what I'm asking you to add to this as a little bit about who you are in the chat, if you have a moment. With that, I am going to share my screen so that you can see our acknowledgement as well. Hopefully you can all see that. As we live, work, and worship in the land that is now called the United States, Lutherans Restoring Creation recognizes that we do so on land that was stolen from Indigenous peoples. As we are called to restore creation, we are also called to restore right relationship with one another. As we join in this holy vocation of loving our neighbor, we honor all our Indigenous siblings who have been companions of the lands, waters, and beings of Turtle Island since time immemorial. We charge our community to learn about the original and continuous stewards of the land upon which we exist. We lament legacies of violence, cultural genocide, and displacement of Indigenous communities, committing ourselves to hearing and speaking the truth of that history and its ongoing effects. May we gather faithfully in mind, body, and spirit, so that we may mend what has been broken and embody Christ's gospel of abundant life. And with that blessing and opening, I would like to hand it over to my lovely colleague, Gabrielle, who I forget where on the planet you are at this moment. You're moving around a lot.
I'm out of the country. I'm in British Columbia today. So I am actually in the process of looking up. I passed a few Indigenous names on the way here, and I actually don't know whose land I ended up on. So I have some research to do. Doing that in the background, flipping between tabs. But yeah, hi, welcome everybody today. And I'm going to start us off with a little devotional, which sometimes we do and sometimes we don't do. But today we're going to dive into the inherent complexity of looking at climate solutions and specifically renewable energies. We're joined by Chad Crowley. Crowley or Crowley? I'm sorry, I didn't ask before we started.
Crowley, you had it.
This is Chad Crowley, who is a recent seminarian, somewhere in the process of pastorhood in that seminary landscape that us at LRC don't understand very well, and also a renewables developer at Apex Energy. And you can correct any of that if I got it wrong, Chad, when you when you get on live. And to start us off today, I'm actually going to do sort of an activity and prayer combined. So I am going to drop something in the chat. We are going to go to Project Drawdown. Some of you may have heard of Project Drawdown, but it is a great resource of scientists who have done a lot of work to look at many, many, many different climate solutions. And the overall hopeful message is that there are so many ways that we can solve this climate problem. And there are many ways to do that. There are many complications in doing that. So today we're going to do a little exercise. I want everybody who is able to hold up a number to the screen. I want you to hold up a number 1 through 4. Ready, set, go. Okay, you have your number. So what you're going to do, and let me share my screen really quick, is by clicking that link in the chat, you're going to end up on the Drawdown Explorer, which has so many different climate solutions. So if you scroll down to the Browse Solutions section, I want you to go to the this section, okay? It'll probably say all classifications. I want you to, if you picked number 1, you're going to click highly recommended. If you pick number 2, you're going to go worthwhile. Number 3, keep watching. And number 4, not recommended. So these are solutions. They're hosting a lot of solutions that people are talking about. Some of the solutions are not recommended for one reason or another. Some of them are kind of in the middle, and some of them are really great solutions based on the research we have at this time. So 1 through 4, I want you to click on that, and then I want you to find one solution or non-solution that speaks to you, and I'm going to have you share in a moment. Okay? Give you a few minutes to pick a solution, do a little reading.
I'm afraid I'm lost. How you said to scroll down? Where do we scroll down at?
Sure. There is a link in the chat. David, are you able to see that? It says drawdown/explorer, drawdown.org.
Okay.
And then I will put some instructions on the screen for you.
You got to go slow. My brain is slow.
And I will put it, I am a visual processor, so I'll put it on the screen for you to see as well.
I'm scrolling down.
Okay. And then there should be a button that says filter by classification. You click on that.
Okay.
And then you can pick whether you want to look at a highly recommended, a worthwhile, or not recommend.
Got it.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
And are we sharing this in the chat or?
I'm going to pick a person who was a 1, a person who was maybe a 2 or 3, and then somebody who was a 4.
Okay, not in the chat.
Okay, I'll give you about 30 more seconds. You might have to skim. You might not get to fully read. Okay, I'm looking for somebody. Oh, am I not sharing right now?
Oh, sorry, you were, but it was your email. So I stopped it.
Oh, thank you.
Yep,
Appreciate
no
that.
problem. It wasn't anything weird.
Okay. All right. So I'm wondering if somebody who picked a not recommended solution, somebody who held up the number 4, if they would share a not recommended solution that they read about, and if you read anything about why it wasn't recommended.
Okay, so I'm Larry.
Hey, Larry.
And I chose a 4. And the one that I chose was the CCS, or carbon capture and storage, which is not recommended. So since I do spend time when I have it to review my YouTube channels, I just recently, and I forget which one it was now, but carbon capture and storage is being talked about by those that are promoting renewable energy as an excuse being made by the fossil fuel industry that we can continue to burn fossil fuels because we're going to have the technology to capture carbon and store it. Well, as of now, the technology, even though money has gone into it, has been a failure. It's not working. And it's being described as sort of a ruse, if you will, by those of us who are promoting renewable energy, simply because the oil companies want to continue status quo. And that's one of their strategies, that, okay, we can continue to burn fossil fuels without mitigating our use because we're going to have carbon capture and storage. Well, they've been saying that for 20 years and nothing has happened, and they put a lot of money into it and it doesn't work. If it works very expensively or not well at all, because you use a whole lot of energy to do direct air capture that you're using more energy to capture the CO2 and you're creating more CO2 by using all that energy. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's not working. And I'd like to hear what Chad has to say about it. But going from there, I'm sure that he could articulate it better than I. So
Yes.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Larry. That's a great example of something that is a lot of discourse has been generated, but not a lot of actual promising solutions. And Chad, I don't know, I won't assume that you're a expert on carbon capture, but I'm sure there will be questions about all sorts of things about renewables tonight. So can somebody who picked a worthwhile or a keep watching solution, a 2 or a 3, share maybe in 2 sentences what a solution they looked at?
By the way, my camera is up here.
Are you still looking for someone to speak?
Yes, if you picked a worthwhile or a keep watching solution.
I chose keep watching, and the particular one that attracted me was the deploy of small modular nuclear reactors. This is an emerging technology, and I really believe to get out of the climate mess, we need technology rather than regulations and taxes. But anyway, small nuclear reactors are being used in Europe, or at least being tested. We've just had a agreement with Great Britain to work together on these. And I think it's an emerging technology that may just come on strong and really satisfy a need perhaps for the data centers. You put a small modular reactor to power your data center.
All right, David, thank you. That's one I haven't looked into a ton. I appreciate that. And then I'm going to have somebody name one highly recommended solution that they saw. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I'm very familiar with Drawdown's tools. I use their materials. So I picked their number 1 solution because I happen to know what their number 1 solution is. And that is deploying alternative refrigerants. Back in 2017, I think it was, when they first came out with their prioritized or ranked list of solutions, that was number 1. And it continues to be number 1. So that's why I picked it.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I love that solution because it's not very sexy, but it is it has a huge impact. It's something you wouldn't expect. Well, thank you everybody for sharing and just getting a brief look at the world of the solutions, the complexity that's there. Today we're going to focus on one of those solutions, which is renewable energies. And Chad's going to be our expert on that today. But before we do, I'd love to open us in prayer. Creator of this complex and sometimes absurd world, we thank you for the day and night, for a world that holds both at once, for us gathered here tonight on Zoom and the whole body of Christ, for the Holy Spirit that works now in the Pacific and the Mountain and the Central and the Eastern time zones, for those of us who are just finishing work, for those of us who are ready for bed, for our siblings across the globe, waking to, going through, resting from every type of work. God of the mycelium and the goblin shark and black holes and universal phenomena yet undiscovered, be with us. Reveal to us the wonder of your creation, that we may love it, be humbled by it, learn from it, and advocate for it. Be here as we puzzle through the mysteries of our day. We are small and our problems are large. We grieve our changing climate. We lament our sluggish response, and God, we repent of our bickering and our pride and our apathy. God that wrestled with Jacob and walked with those on the road to Emmaus. God who flipped the table of some sinners and ate dinner with others. You gave us stories and not solutions. Give us the curiosity to ask the right questions. Give us the prophetic imagination to envision a world of your shalom, and give us the courage to make it so that your will be done. Your will be done on heaven and on planet Earth. Amen. And with that, I'm going to let Chad Crowley introduce himself and talk a little bit about what he does. And we'll have some starter questions for him to work through, and then we'll take questions from all of you. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the fun activity. I thought that was a really cool website, and I appreciated hearing from everybody. And I love the prayer. I love the goblin shark shout out. That was a nice touch. Well, welcome everybody. I will just share my screen so that you can see what I'm seeing. And I have a couple of things up in response to some of the questions that, in all honesty and transparency, I know what they are ahead of time. So, but I'm excited to be here with you guys. Just by way of brief introduction, my name's Chad. I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the Virginia Synod, and I am, as all of you are, many things. I am husband to my wonderful wife, Sarah. I'm a dad, newish dad, 10 months dad, and as was said earlier, I graduated from Lutheran Seminary in Minneapolis with my Master's of Divinity, and am endorsed for Word and Sacrament, but not yet ordained. I sort of took a bit of a hiatus with a young kid to focus on being a dad before I launch on to what's next in the ordination process. But I'm still a candidate for ordination in the ELCA. My day job is a renewable energy developer. I work at a company called Apex, and we do utility scale wind, solar, and storage across the country. We're maybe about 400-ish people. We're headquartered in Charlottesville because the people who founded our company like Charlottesville, and that's the only reason. But we work all over the country, building, large projects. I've been there for 7 years now. And I have a master's of science in finance as well as a bachelor's in energy and environmental policy. And before I worked at Apex, I've had jobs, bits and pieces in a lot of things, but primarily in DC, working for the Department of Energy before coming to the private development space. In terms of ministry, I did my clinical pastoral education through Johns Hopkins Hospital. And then my wife was a paramedic, and so I started doing EMS chaplaincy, which I still do as a volunteer, working with first responders here in the city. And then, like I said, I do some supply stuff now, but not a full internship because that takes a lot of time and effort and energy to work in a parish. And I'm with a day job and a kid at home. I'm trying to really be present with them in this season. So that's me in a short version, but I'm happy to share other things as they come up, or if people have questions at the end. But yeah, that's the introduction.
So please, you just named a ton of different roles that you fill. Specifically, I would love to hone in on your seminarian pastor role and your renewables developer role. These might seem like two totally different things, but how do you see the overlap between any of these?
Yes, happy to talk. I am what you call a turbo Lutheran, so my answers are all going to be very Lutheran, which is great for this space, I think. But definitely going to use the word vocation, right? I think that, that's such a Lutheran concept, but it's one that's really helped me think about my life and how the pieces all fit together. And I think for everybody, what pieces we're called to for what seasons, right? Because these vocations change over time, but they're always in relationship with one another. I think that, my renewable energy, because it's my job and my health insurance, supports our family. And my ministry, I think, has had a profound impact on me and my development as a person, which I think also helps me show up as a husband and father. And I think both of those things contribute to care of creation, care for the neighbor, care for the world. But they all, cross over, right? I mean, things that I learned as a husband and a father, I can bring into ministry. Things I learn in ministry, I can bring into the workplace. Things I learn, from the world, I bring back into those spaces. And then, unfortunately, they don't make this anymore, and I wish I bought like 500 of them. But old Lutheran used to have a license to sin boldly. And I used to hand these out when I was doing campus ministry at my church here. So I don't have any more, but they used to print these little cards that said it's a license to sin boldly. And on the back, of course, it has Luther's quote to Melanchthon, be a sinner and sin boldly, but believe and rejoice in Christ even more boldly. Pray boldly, for you are a mighty sinner, right? Which is this idea that we're never going to be able to show up perfectly, but we are still called to show up. So we know we're going to make mistakes, and so we sin boldly, but we rejoice in Christ more boldly, which is that we're always trying to get better. If you're in the Luther Seminary Twin Cities apparatus, there was an artist named Joe Davis who used to have a sweatshirt that said, show up. And I have one of those too. And I think that's another way of saying sin boldly, right? And so as I think about how these things fit together, certainly as a father, I'm doing the best I can. And you're always learning, right? With the new, your first kid. But it's the same at work. It's the same in ministry. You're always trying to center yourself on God and the neighbor. And then you do the best you can. That's how I kind of see these things link a little bit.
I'm going to hone in a little bit on vocation and job as a young adult. I think we're peers, maybe. These are terms I hear a lot. And I'm curious if beyond just being a job and beyond being a Lutheran that cares for earth, one of our many callings as Christians, how does your Lutheranism kind of fit into your job versus your vocation? Tell us a little more about that.
Sure. Before I move on to the next slide, I will say that, I think everybody who's called to this, I'm love the outdoors through and through, right? Did my Eagle Scout, was outside all the time. I actually started college as a marine biology major, which is why I appreciated the shark thing. I worked at a marine lab. I had a part-time job as a park ranger for several years in New York State, which I saw somebody mention in the chat, actually in the Finger Lakes region, so a lot of the Haudenosaunee lands there. And, I've always just been inspired by creation. And so that's obviously one huge underpinning of why go into this space at a high level. I think one of the more interesting pieces, which is what I'm going to talk more about on the next slide, is how you navigate the tensions that come up in doing the work. So you feel called to show up, right? And then what does our tradition maybe say about how we can navigate that? And I really like two kingdoms, Luther's theology of two kingdoms. And I know sometimes people might rephrase that as realms, because kingdoms obviously is perhaps an archaic term of some, description, but this idea that there's in Christ and, at the second coming, where the world is united and sort of made whole and heaven descends and, new creation is made new. We all exist in this right now, this kingdom of God, but we also exist in the world, which is the temporal kingdom. And I put two quotes from Luther's treatise here on worldly authority or on secular authority, depending on how you see the translation. And this is the tension, right? He writes, if all the world were made up of true Christians, there would be no need for ruler, king, lord, saw, law, because what use would they be, right? Because we would all be loving each other. Unfortunately, we live in a world with sin. And so for now, we have parents, teachers, police officers, soldiers, whatever, these earthly orders. And then the question is, okay, well, how do I live in that world as a dual citizen, right? I'm a citizen of the kingdom of God, and I'm a citizen of the kingdom of the world, the temporal kingdom, or whatever you want to call it. And this is where the rub is. This is the interesting thing for me. Luther writes, essentially, they have to be rulers, but you're a Christian ruler not because you don't enforce any laws or don't enforce anything, or you can't, but you try to do what you are in the most Christian way you can and still be that thing, which is a weird way of saying it. But, if you were a police officer, Luther might say, you can't say I'm a police officer, but because I'm a Christian, I'm never going to enforce any rules or laws or punish anybody or anything. He would say, well, then you're not a police officer. So if you have a vocation to be a police officer, then what is the most you can bring mercy and kindness and justice and all the good things into that thing, while recognizing that when you're on earth, it's just different. One, they are separate, even though they're both under God as part of this thing. And I think, as a manager of people, this comes up a lot for me. I like just want to hug my whole team all the time because they're awesome, but sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, and being a manager entails having difficult conversations. And so you have to do that sometimes to still be a manager. And I think being a developer falls into this category. I often think I wish that probably everybody on this call would agree, like, I wish we did everything on that website that Gabrielle sent, but we don't, right? For whatever reason. And so the onus is on the developer then to say, well, I'm in the world, or I say the onus is on the Christian developer to say, I'm in the world, I'm in these systems, this is the temporal kingdom. And so I have to talk about this to banks and investors and tax equity people and regulators and all these other folks in ways that they understand. And sometimes that's it can be business. It is business, right? We need to get money and get investments and get permits and do all these other kinds of things. And it's not that that's a bad thing, but it just means that sometimes there is a trade-off of saying, well, I have to still make a project make a certain amount of return, or else they're not going to build it. And there are trade-offs there, right? Like, development is development, like, it is intrinsically changing the thing that it was into something else. Whether you're building houses, there used to be a field there or a tree there. If you put, a wind turbine on a spot, then that spot is not, it has a wind turbine on it now, and it didn't before, right? I mean, it's just like kind of the nature of things, transmission lines, whatever it is. And so it's this interesting dance of always asking yourself, how far can I really, thinking, like, how far can I push this in, like, the gospelist way I can, right? Always looking for those ways to jam the gospel into everything you can, while recognizing that at the end of the day, I still have to make an investment proposal for somebody. And it has to make sense in those terms. I will say that all of these opinions are my own. I should have said this at the beginning, but just as I talk and blather on, this is just Chad sharing among friends. But yeah, there's a lot here, and Luther has more to say on this. If you want to dive deeper, he wrote I don't know what you call it, a treatise, I guess, again on whether the soldier too can be saved, or the title is something like that in English. and it's about soldiers and warfare and their souls. And he sort of delineates again that, at the end of the day, it's your conscience. And if you ever are in a situation where something's wrong, you have to stand up as a Christian. But up until that point, like, we exist in this real weird world where you might be a soldier and that might be your vocation, and that's very complicated. And there's a lot of nuance here, which I love about Lutheran theology, because it's all gray area, which is fun for academics and sometimes challenging to derive simple axioms from.
I'm wondering, I'm actually going to, I know you have some prepared work here, but I'm going to complicate it a little bit. And I'm wondering if you can like briefly tell us like what is under the umbrella of a developer? Because a developer is not the person who applies solar panels. It's not the person who even makes the solar panels, right? So you have a very specific job. And to go along with that, I guess, what would you tell churches or request that churches know regarding like the development realm and renewable energy and the things you do?
Absolutely. Good question. So a developer, which is probably true for every type of developer, but for renewables, which is what I do, I'll talk about that. We look out at whatever our market is, and my company works in the United States, and we try to figure out where the demand for renewable energy is going to be. It takes a long time to develop a project, probably from an idea to something being online can be maybe 4 years if you're really fast, and it can be 10 or 15 years for some projects. So really long time horizons, and we're trying to look out into the future and say, where should we be? Where is the demand signals? How can we quantify that and look for those spots, whether it's, companies want it here, utilities want it here, the states want it here, how much, what kind, what attributes are they looking for? And then we look out at those, okay, we have the opportunity identified, we think, and then we go to those places, either, virtually using geospatial tools or, research, or actually being on the ground. And we look around and say, okay, well, and I'll just pick Virginia because I live here, if Virginia has the Virginia Clean Economy Act and they have a utility that wants this, that, and the other, then we're going to try to build some projects in Virginia. And we look at, for electricity, where is the transmission line infrastructure, the bulk transmission system that takes high voltage electricity around the state, because you have to be able to connect to that. And then we look at all sorts of things from, and again, I'll just use wind turbines as an example, but there's airspace considerations, there's environmental considerations, there's cultural considerations. Obviously, the community engagement piece is enormous. Making sure we're talking to landowners and finding people who want to lease us their land to build the turbines on, and then the communities that we're supporting, what they need, what their concerns are, town halls, dinners with the landowners and the communities, or we do conservation grant programs, we do community benefit grants, we meet with legislature members or regulators, all these pieces, federal stuff, state stuff, and we try to put together a project that checks all those boxes, and then at the end has to go out to the market and get a lender to give us money to build it, and then an offtake for that power, an agreement that says, hey, we're going to buy this power for this much for this long, and all of that has to, clear our investor hurdles, where people will say, okay, well, for me to give you money to build this project, I need to have a certain return on my money, because money costs me to have, or it costs me money to get money, which is a weird thing to say, but there's a risk-free rate from a central bank or whatever else, and then those people lend money or invest money in this, that, and the other. So, that's what we do. We procure all the components, so we don't make the wind turbines or the blades. We work with different suppliers to try to find the best ones. And we also don't necessarily construct them like in-house. Like we usually work with a contractor to build the things because that's their specialty. And we would oversee the construction, and we usually then operate the projects on the other side. But, construction is hundreds and hundreds of people building these things over a year or two. So that's like a whole industry unto itself. But we're still engaged with the community. That's most developers. Some developers only do part of that or another part of that. Some developers will buy early projects and then finish them. Some developers start early projects and then sell them to those people. I work for one that does the full thing. But is that helpful? Or
Yeah, you gave us so much, but I think
sorry.
No, it's great for those of us who are not in the realm. I think we understand that. Phoebe put it in the chat, like you're asset mapping. You're seeing where things can happen and seeing where the potential is. And I think a lot of us might interact with what you're doing at that discussion level. When you're talking about town halls and meeting with communities, a lot of us might be able to relate to that and see your work in our own spaces too. So with that being said, I think, if you want to talk a little bit, go on.
Sure. So to your other question, and I have this quote from former Bishop Eaton, I guess I should say, or retired Bishop Eaton. Wow, Lutherans love paradox, right? Like that's why I continue to be in love with the Lutheran tradition. Law and gospel, sinner saint, free and bound, right? Like there's this inherent tension in development that I alluded to, where whatever it was is changed slightly in some ways by the fact that development happens, right? It is sort of ultimately construction. And I think the thing I would tell communities, and I just want to be cognizant of time here, is at the end of the day, developers should come with an openness and a humility to learn and hear from the communities in which they're in. Obviously, not every developer does that. And again, name your industry. The good ones do. And I would always encourage communities to hold developers accountable to that standard. And it is my hope that in return, the communities are interested in engaging developers around what good development looks like, knowing that it is still development, right? Like this will be construction. We will build roads. We will build, transmission lines. We will put solar panels in places or build wind turbines. And if that is a good fit for your community, or you discern that in service of the neighbor or the planet, that is a good thing to have, then how can we make that the best possible version of it? Which, again, that's an interesting dance. And I think only in community and in conversation is that something that is ascertainable, right? There's loads of examples from clinical pastoral education where you don't really know what someone is thinking until you sit down and talk to them, which is it sounds like a platitude, but it is true in the sense that it takes time to really understand and listen. And hopefully that relational piece is just something you can't skip. Good developers understand that the relationships really matter.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And to that point, I'm just wondering, I think this community, for those of you who this might be your first call, you might not relate to this, but we've been talking a lot about Renewables as a community of faith and as an LRC network member. As we've had some excitement about this new newish technology and the impact it might have on our planet, I think some of the concern is that we exist in diverse communities, and when people are excited about renewables, I think some of the first questions we've been asked is this is still controversial in my community. And I wonder how you engage with that when you're in town halls and you're in a community and you're knocking on people's doors. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I always say that I don't say this as if I came up with this. I love to parrot and repeat the well trusted phrase, change happens at the speed of relationship, right? I think, most towns have an equivalent of the feed store where everybody hangs out for coffee in the morning or something, right? Or coffee hour after the service in the narthex or whatever it is in your communities, right? And really, if you're able to go in and just spend time to get to know people, and you commit to being present and being engaged and listening, then I think that matters a great deal into getting honest feedback. We went to do a rooftop solar array at my home congregation, that I worked on this project, getting the solar on the roof there with our social ministry committee for, a year or two. And we have a very purple congregation, I think. And we ended up doing solar, but it was like, you're just building those relationships with everybody in the congregation. And it's tempting to think that there's a faster way to do it right, but there really isn't. And then even the people who you will never see eye to eye with, right? Some people will never want to lease their land for a wind farm or whatever. But at least it's built on a respectful disagreement of saying, you're in my community and I see you and I hear you and we exchange that the same. We can sit at the table together. It's not no animosity there, but we're just not going to agree and we can still shake hands at the end of the day. The other thing that I think is, and this is a phrase, I think there's an organization actually with this name, but they focus on housing. Affordable housing, but yes, in God's backyard, as an interesting question for congregations to think about. I think people around renewables hear a lot of NIMBYism, like not in my backyard. That's, the acronym NIMBY. But I think it's interesting to play with the question of saying, well, what if this is God's backyard? What if all of this is God's backyard? And if we're stewards of this yard, what might that be calling us to do with this land or this building or this rooftop, that might be different from how we would use it if it was truly our backyard? What is that in service of the neighbor? So, and again, like as Gabrielle said, like I'm not here to tell you that all development that comes into your neighborhood is good development, right? So like don't mishear me. But I think that there is a way to engage that constructively where you can make it work if both parties, the developer and the community, are willing to come to that table with that relationship and that sort of open-mindedness.
Thank you I have selfishly taken a lot of times for the questions that I thought were interesting and I wanted to engage you on. And I think it's time, unless there's anything else you want to say before we move into hearing from the rest of the people in the room.
No, I'll leave my nice, prettier pictures up. Well, I think they're pretty, but but yeah, happy to answer what I can as best I can. And I am also, and just to say this out loud too, like I'm also learning all the time. So I may not have an answer, but I will do my best. And I appreciate everybody for coming online to learn. I really love renewables. I think our world really needs them. We're not on track for our climate goals, as you all know. And I think that this is such a great story of not just environmental protection, but also like rural economic development, which is very near and dear to my heart. And we did some math once about like every wind farm we can build is like, however much natural gas we don't have to burn or however much we don't have to import from the Middle East, which, there's a lot of volatility in sort of petrostates and the sort of human rights implications of those, governing structures that are underpinned by the fossil fuel thing. I could go on for days, but I think it's like American domestic energy in our communities and it's clean and I love everything about it. Well, there are always things to quibble about, but like, I really do enjoy this and I appreciate you guys for inviting me to share these two things that I love, which is Martin Luther's writings and wind turbines.
Yay! I just want to thank you so much for being so excited about it. I don't know how we could have a more perfect speaker. Like, how many, I mean, I know you mentioned that you talk a lot about your faith with your colleagues, you know, just as Chad, not as their manager. But how often do you get so Lutheran, right? So I hope this
Yep.
felt yeah, anyways. I wanted to lift up Noni's question first because she asked it really early on, but wondering overall too, like how do we get she's wondering specifically, does APACS work with congregations, especially doing solar around the country? Do you consult with a congregation who's exploring renewables as an option? And I'll just add as a follow-up, like, do you know other groups that do that? I know that the Presbyterian version of the Mission Investment Fund has a really good group of people doing that kind of work. Yeah, do you know who's doing that right now?
Yeah, I do it as a hobby for fun because I'm known for that now. So like I've helped a few ELCA churches here and one Catholic nunnery put solar panels on their property. I find to Noni's intuition there that having somebody who speaks the language is very helpful for talking and making sense of the quotes and stuff you get. We don't do that work ourselves. It's not, it is great and it is a different scale. The residential sort of commercial scale is just a different segment of the industry than the one we work in. But it's all the same, you know, a kilowatt's a kilowatt, right? Or whatever, right? So, I mean, we can kind of parlay the same things and we have all the fun data that they have to know how much it should cost so we can like kind of poke them. But we do have some grants that we do for nonprofits to go solar as our particular company. I know there's groups like Interfaith Power and Light and others that I think have some of those resources, but I also think that maybe if you know a developer locally in your community, I bet you could ask them and they would have somebody who'd be willing to help out. But a lot of it's word of mouth. If you have a question about it and you want to reach out to me, I think Phoebe or somebody can get us in touch. So don't hesitate to send me a note. I'm happy to.
I want to use this conversation as a good excuse to reach out to our friends at Mission Investment Fund to find out whether or not they're
Perfect.
interested in helping make more connections as they had in the past, but don't do so much anymore. I think seeing how many people are interested in this could be helpful.
For Lutherans too, I might say like Thrivent
Yeah.
might maybe know something. But
Okay. Yeah, I should try seeing what they have available.
they do that 250 every year for um, this stuff. So
Yes, they do. They do throw out some money here and there, but maybe yeah, to go towards a consultant would be a great reason. Lisa asks, "Have you worked in agrivoltaics?"
so we do in the sense that like some grazing things happen at our solar farms, like goats and things. Um,
On purpose or just happened?
yeah, on purpose. Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's sort of like very dependent on where you are. For wind farms, you just do whatever you want underneath them. They don't really change the land use at all. People you can see in that bottom picture that's in Ames, Iowa, in Lutheran land. That I took from the top. I took that picture from the top of one of the turbines, but you can see the fields are just they're still there. So people farm or do all sorts of stuff. So it's definitely an option. There's some if you're doing like grazing, you got to space the panels out in certain ways or certain configurations. So there's some trade-offs, but yeah, it's a lot around what the landowners want too. We usually try to go for marginal farmland, honestly, because prime agricultural land is usually best for agricultural purposes. So for the most part, a lot of the stuff that we look for and the stuff that the farmers want to lease to us is the lower performing parcels that they have for agriculture too. So some places it works really well for grazing, but in a lot of places it's either unchanged or it was sort of marginal to begin with for them.
And Ellen and Beth are asking from Delaware, make sure you know that. How do we get engaged with the developers when our state representatives don't make it public to us?
Certainly. Well, I would hope well, good developers should have a public engagement process when they go into a community. whether it's a local paper or town hall or some sort of city council meetings. Those things are usually places where that happens. They should host some sort of town halls or informational things, especially in the rural communities we work in a lot. I find that as soon as you ask one person if they're interested in having a wind farm, everybody knows that you were in the neighborhood asking if they wanted to have a wind farm. I think there's a tight knitness to a lot of rural communities, that is word of mouth information sharing, from families who've known each other for generations. But certainly by the time you get to permits or anything like that, they will be local or township type things. Ideally, they've engaged people before that, though. Most projects, if you have a name, will have a website. Or if you went, so for example, if you went to Apex Clean Energy's website, you see a map of the projects, and you could click on them, and it would take you to a website specifically for that project. So if you knew, we were proposing a wind farm in your county, there would be a whole website set up directly for that, and then people you could talk to specifically in that county about it. Because when we're working on a project, people usually the people who are working on that project live in that community typically. Like a field teams and developers, they usually work in the states that they live in.
That's also pretty cool. That's pretty important, I would imagine. And that actually goes to the question that I had for you, but you basically answered it. But I think longer term, you talked also about just knowing what our role is, that we have our own vocation in this, and seeing the bigger picture is part of our vocation, but sometimes we have to focus on what it is we're in control of. And so I'm curious, in your work, where you feel developers are developers also stakeholders in the larger systematic idea of where we procure, right? The tension with a lot of environmentalists are, where are we getting? It's still extractive to get all the stuff we need for batteries to store this stuff. So there's a lot of tension there with, if we just keep having to mine for this stuff, how does are we just kicking the can down the road? Are we just hurting other areas? Not our own backyard, to make us feel clean on this end. Do you feel that also, I think the science is helping us understand that it's less impact, but it's still impact for particular sacrifice zones. And I'm wondering if you feel like developers have the power to be part of that conversation. And if not, could they, or how can communities of faith have a power to have more of a voice in that part of the equation, without necessarily coming out and saying, no, don't develop clean energy either. We can't do anything until we get it all perfect. Again, that's why I like being a nuanced Lutheran. But yeah, do you feel like there's an empowering part of being a developer in that procurement end?
Yeah, it's a really complicated question, because I think you're absolutely right. Like, the industry writ large response has been sort of like, well, if you compare extraction to extraction, this one's far better. Or if you compare life cycle emissions from this one to that one, this one's far better. But if your concern is taken one step further and saying, but I'm still concerned about any extraction, right? Then obviously that is not a zero thing. I think that there are certain things that are easier to choose between than others. Like, if there's only one component manufacturer that really makes this, whatever it is, die cast thing that you need for whatever, then you're kind of stuck with it. And especially for things like steel, for a myriad reasons, we don't make a lot of some of these cast iron components or whatever in the United States at all anymore, right? Or even Europe, right? They're made by cost reasons, generally speaking, in places that have less protection for workers, and for the environment. And the tricky part is, and I'll segue into this question that I see in the chat from Eric, is that it's not great out there. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that, but it's sort of like you're contending with a lot of headwinds at the same time, and you're trying to manage costs on the other, and that means that the supply chain is usually incentivized to offer the most low costest things ever, because that increases the chances that somebody will buy them because people will be doing projects, right? So solar panels are a good example of this. I think batteries are a good example of this. A million people make solar panels and batteries. The only thing other than some technical characteristics that might distinguish them is the price. And if somebody's able to sell it on the market for less, then people will tend to buy that thing. And if you don't buy that thing, then you are now however much more expensive than your competitor. And it's like this negative cycle of, well, then I can't build my projects, you know. So it's hard. I mean, I think, wind components in particular tend to be made in North America or Europe, so they have more transparent supply chains, but especially for solar and for batteries, other than the ones that are made in the United States or Canada, it can be very tricky to know exactly. And I'm not an expert in this. I don't work for a procurement team, so I will caveat my lack of knowledge there. But I would say as an industry, there's a lot more we could be doing. Let me put it that way. Like, the factors are not like the developers don't have projects. It's that there are too many complexities to move them forward. But I wish we could build all the projects I have on my desk. But we probably won't be able to. I mean, of 12 ideas we have, maybe 4 or 5 of them hit the real world, and maybe like one of those things survives. It can be death by 1,000 cuts for a lot of these things, more than some of these offshore wind farms that Eric is alluding to, that the Trump administration just like tried to, take away their permits or take back their leases.
Well, on a reimagining note, if you can kind of end us on a prayerful reimagining, what would you like to leave us with as people of faith that you would like to really imagine and have a church community do for you when you come into a community? How can your local Lutheran church or any church help you do this more faithfully and effectively, what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that being open to the conversation, if you feel as I do, and I think this happens a lot in my town, more for like affordable housing is a better example of where I can put myself in the congregation's shoes. And I'll throw my own congregation under the bus here a little bit so that no one is, mad at me for pointing fingers at others. But like, we had an apartment complex that was going to get built on an old bank that was right across from where our church was. And I'd say again, we were kind of like 50-50 split. People were like, well, this is going to make more traffic. This is going to, this, that, and the other is going to make maybe my house prices go down a little bit because there's more supply or whatever. And then other people were like, wow, we have a new community right across the street. How many people can come to our church? Isn't that wonderful? And we're, supporting affordable housing and this, that, and the other. But it's that thing of saying my faith, at least I think for me, says, if I assume, as Luther's catechism writes, the most charitable interpretations of the other, and I seek to honor and defend them in all things, not just, not slander them, what does it look like for me to talk to that person? And you may talk to that developer and you find out that they're doing everything wrong and they don't care about your community at all, and they're just money grubbers and they're gonna bulldoze your wetland and everything else. And then you can say, well, no thanks, please see your way out. But I think a lot of things die on the vine before they even get to like the real conversation. And I think just viewing the faith lens as something that invites you into that discernment that we're doing all the time as Christians about how to live in the world might be a way of opening up a lot more paths forward, where there could genuinely be a good partnership, but because of very understandable fears and apprehensions or, things you've heard or bad experiences, we fight the ghosts of previous developers all the time. Some two guys in a truck will row it into a town and make a mess of everything, and then we'll come by later and people are like, oh, I know developers, get the heck out of my town. And I don't blame them, because they had an awful experience where they were burned by somebody who tried to do that kind of stuff. And that's, I think, a little bit of I recognize the hard ask of a faith thing is like, keep coming back to that table with the same level of willingness to listen is really hard and might not be rewarded in a sense, but I think is important to do in the same way that it's really hard to do that with people in your community that you might disagree with from a variety of standpoints. But I think just expanding the faith to that lens, I think, is sort of what I hope is a fair ask, because I don't think it's fair to ask, oh, well, all development is good, or all wind farms are good, or all whatever, because that's not necessarily true, right? But the engagement piece, I think, if me and everybody else would do 10% more of that in their aspects of their life, I think we make the world a lot more friendly, at least.
Can't get over what a pastoral presence you have as a developer and talking about this particular subject. I just want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank Christine Moffett, who said, hey, you guys should talk to Chad. I really appreciate that you shared a lot more, not just about what you do, but why you do it. And Gabrielle, thank you so much for asking your very particular questions and your opening prayer. And thank you all for being on here. I know that you might all think of other questions. Chad, is it okay if we keep sending questions to you if more come up? And I take on the pledge I want to continue in conversation with Mission Investment Fund and who else in our institution can help us be better stakeholders and be in better relationship with the land that we're on. So thank you all. Peace be with you all, and we'll share the recording soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.